Hello, everybody. My name is s01e Observer, and welcome to the Paranormal Observer Podcast. In today's episode, we will be discussing the Ouija Board. So, the Ouija Board, also known as a spirit board or a talking board, is a flat marked board with the letters of the alphabet, the numbers 0 through 9, and the words yes or no, and occasionally hello and goodbye, along with various symbols and graphics. And it uses a planchette, which is a arrow-shaped or a heart-shaped piece of wood or plastic with a circle in the middle that is sometimes it's just a circle. Other times it has a magnifying glass of sorts, or just a piece of glass, clear glass in it, so that you can read the letters and yes and no on the board, so you can read the board. And it is a movable indicator to spell out messages during the session or the seance or what have you. And everyone playing places their fingertips on the planchette, and it is moved about the board to spell out words. Now, I know we're jumping into this, but I just wanted to lay out to you what the Ouija board is. Apparently, there are the basic concept of the Ouija board was started back in the late 1800s, and it was made available and as a board game so that people could perform sessions in their homes. But it's basically a board for talking to the spirit world. So let's get into this. Now, the Ouija board, or the word Ouija, is a trademark of Hasbro. Did you know that? The same company that was making our G.I. Joes has a trademark on Hasbro, on Ouija. But the word Ouija is often used somewhat generically, just to refer to a talking board. Now, spiritualists in the early 1800s in the U.S. believed that the dead were able to contact the living and vice versa, using a talking board, very similar to what is known as the modern Ouija board. And they did this to enable a faster means of communication with the spirits. Now, following its commercial introduction by a gentleman known as Elijah Jefferson Bond in July 1st of 1890, the Ouija board was regarded as an innocent parlor game, just a game, unrelated to the occult, until American spiritualist Pearl Curran popularized its use as a divining tool during World War I. But to give you some more information on Elijah Bond was a businessman. He was an American lawyer. He was a businessman. He was an inventor, and he is known for inventing the Ouija board. But that goes without saying, he's invented other things and patented many items, including one of which the steam boiler. But he is best remembered for patenting what has become known as the Ouija board. Now, I'm going to give you some side information on Elijah Jefferson Bond. It is said that Elijah Jefferson Bond sold his soul to the devil, and the mass production of the Ouija board was all a part of a conspiracy to make it available to the masses. Interesting. Now, that's just hearsay. I have no proof of that. That's just what I read, what I heard, but I can't prove that. But these 1800s America has a lot of weird stories like that. Lawyers doing battle with the devil and supposedly winning. So Bond filed for a U.S. patent in 1890, and there were two other gentlemen listed as assignees: Charles W. Kennard and one William H.A. Maupin. They were both listed as assignees. And the patent was granted almost a year later in 1891. And so Bond sold the U.S. distribution rights for the Ouija board to the Kennard Novelty Company. And by 1907, Bond had relocated to West Virginia, where he established the Swastika Novelty Company. And that company produced a knockoff of Bond's original Ouija board called the Nirvana. So, Mr. Bond made Ouija boards available. He made them so that everyone could have one. And you got to understand, during the 1800s, during the mid-1800s, early to mid-1800s, spiritualism began to boom. All right. Obviously, Christianity was already a thing, but a lot of different separations in different religions began to be born around that time. Christianity obviously was already established for 1,000 or so years, but Mormonism became a thing. Seventh-day Adventism, which it wasn't known as Seventh-day Adventism back then, but that also became a thing during this time. And a lot of these things began to develop, in particular in New York. And during this time, you have people like the Fox sisters, the Fox sisters were two little girls who told their neighbor that they were able to communicate with spirits, and they brought their neighbor into their home, and they would do this little thing by asking the spirits, hey, if you hear a knock 3 times, and then they'll hear 3 knocks, and they do other proving things like that. Now, if the neighbor was paying attention, they would realize that it was April 1st when they heard when these girls presented this information to them. So they would have known that it was April Fool's Day. But that's just one example of how some innocent little thing can blow up and explode and become a trend. And talking to the spirit world became a huge trend back then. And so Mr. Bond, in making the Ouija board available, gave everybody a way in which they could perform seances in their homes. And that happened a lot. A lot of seances were performed in a lot of homes on a Saturday night. Hey, bring your family over. You bring your family over to my place, and we'll have a seance. It'll be a great time. People did this, and they did this without any inkling of an idea or concern that this is in any way related to the occult. So if you know anything about the occult stands alone by itself, apart from other religious sects and ideologies. But people would do this. This is what they did back in the 1800s. And but it should be known that during this time, Christianity began to grow in America as well. It not just grow, but it got better as people became more knowledgeable and people began to really get in touch with God in a reality and in a real sense. You had many revival preachers out there going around running their circuits, carrying the gospel of Jesus Christ to people, and it was changing their lives. Meanwhile, in the background, you have things like this happening, where people were participating in what they believe were to be innocent Saturday night's fun, but really they were dabbling in something that was bigger than what they thought, and more dangerous than what they thought. So spiritualists in the United States believed that the dead could be contacted, and they did their thing to contact it. And the Ouija board was made available. Paranormal and supernatural beliefs associated with the Ouija boards have been criticized by the scientific community as well as other religions. But science, if you know anything about science, science relies on specific things. Scientists want to know what's really happening and what leads up to it. And they want to get from point A to point B and have a clear path there and to understand how things work. So the scientific community have criticized the Ouija board, and they characterize it as pseudoscience. Right, the action of the board can most easily be explained by unconscious movements of those controlling the pointer. Now, this is a psychophysiological phenomenon known as the Ideomotor effect, or the background thing that actually happens when people play with Ouija boards. So some Christian denominations have warned against Ouija boards use, and they believe it can lead to demonic possession. And some terrible things have happened to people playing with Ouija boards. These things have happened, but as staunchly against playing with Ouija boards as many Christian denominations are, occultists, on the other hand, are divided on the issue. Some saying that it can be a tool for positive transformation, but others reiterated the warnings of many Christians and cautioned inexperienced users against it. I would dare say, stay away from it. Your best bet is to stay away from it. So, I guess the question that comes now is, why? Why play with the Ouija board? Why? People have been playing with Ouija boards for years. This is common knowledge. And it's partially due to the fact that it was presented as a game. It's presented as a novelty, nonetheless. The fact that the problem I have with it is the fact that it's being presented as a game, and being presented as a game is suggested that it's harmless. Okay. Monopoly is harmless. All right. Sorry is harmless. Shoots and ladders is harmless. Unless you're losing. But they're harmless in that, it's just the game. But there's a little more to the Ouija board. You're putting yourself in a position to contact the spirit world. You're putting yourself in a position to connect with that which is beyond this physical plane upon which we lived. It should be understood that there is a basic war between good and evil going on in our world. I mean, everybody should know this by now. It's just an underlying theme of our particular dispensation on this planet. There is a war between good and evil, and the battle is being raged where? Not just on the spiritual plane, but in the minds and in the hearts of men and women. These are facts. So when you play with the Ouija board and you're unexperienced and you're unprepared for what could happen, and you don't know what you're doing, what you are doing is putting yourself in danger, because you don't know what or who is going to speak to you through this board. You understand what I'm saying? Do you get that? You don't know what or who is going to speak to you through this board. Now we know that God speaks to mankind. He speaks to us through his word. And God is pretty consistent. If God is going to speak to us, he will speak to us through his word and through men of God. And really, through his spirit, by his spirit, he'll deal with our hearts and our minds and lead us to a better understanding of him and a better understanding of Jesus Christ, and put us in a position to where we can be blessed and prosper spiritually and physically upon the face of this earth. You come into contact with these entities, you don't know what you're getting. You don't know what evil spirit is lurking, just waiting for someone to put their hand to the planchette so that they can manipulate them. It happens. It happens. This is what makes Ouija boards so dangerous to me, because you just don't know what you're playing with. And these spirits, believe it or not, they're smarter than you. They're smarter than me. They're smarter than we are. They're quite intelligent. But aside from that, there's also the Ideomotor effect. Now, the Ideomotor effect is that psychophysiological phenomenon that the action of the board can be most easily explained by this unconscious movement of those controlling the pointer. So the people who are controlling the pointer control the board, and whether people are pushing the planchette around or whether a spirit is moving the planchette around, it depends on the people making contact with the planchette. And I would dare say the people in the room. So if you're playing with the Ouija board and your hands is on the planchette, you are subject to the Ideomotor effect. And okay, I'm going to have to just go into and explain what the Ideomotor effect is. And I have here a paper that was written by John Jackson, and he makes his paper available to anyone who wants to read it. It involves the Ideomotor effect. It talks about the scope of it. It talks about how it works, and really, I think his purpose, I don't want to know what his purpose was in writing it, but I think his purpose was to just make people aware that the Ideomotor effect is real, and it's not necessarily some evil entity out there trying to manipulate you, but it's actually us who guide what is done and how it comes across. But at the same time, it kind of, I kind of feel like he's trying to say there is no spiritual being that's controlling the board. It's just you. And sometimes it may just be you. But those spiritual beings need someone to react off of. So let's get into this. Because the Ideomotor effect is being billed as a natural explanation for many paranormal experiences, not just playing with Ouija boards. So you've heard the phrase, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. This has to do with the Ideomotor effect. This is a loose way of explaining the Ideomotor effect. So, you stay up late, you watch a scary movie. Let's say you watch Paranormal Activity. So now you go to bed, and every sound that you hear while you're laying in bed, you're going to react to it. What's that? This is the Ideomotor effect. Our mind does more to make things real than we want them to be. Like, I had a lady tell me that she saw Santa Claus. She now, at the point that she told us this, she was relating that she was talking about how her mind, we were talking about how the mind works and how the mind can deceive us. And she was like, I saw Santa Claus. You can't tell me I didn't see Santa Claus. But she says she saw Santa Claus. It's because she wanted to see him so bad that her mind latched onto it. And so she was certain that she saw Santa Claus. She didn't. Santa Claus doesn't exist. I personally don't believe he ever existed. And if he did, he was just a normal man that dressed up warmly to go and give toys to kids all over the town. And the myth of him just grew out of control after that. But this is kind of like the Ideomotor effect. It's just our minds playing tricks on us, really. It's our subconscious mind bringing to fruition something that we're thinking subconsciously. So let's deal with this. The Ideomotor effect, a natural explanation of many paranormal experiences by John Jackson, circa 2005. We're all aware of our conscious actions. If you want to pick up a pen, for example, we simply think about the action and then do it. This is known as volition. It's entirely natural, and it feels entirely natural. There are other actions that we perform, however, that are unconscious, instinctive actions. Actions performed without volition. The first category of unconscious action is known as excitomotor actions. These are actions such as breathing, swallowing, and maintaining a heartbeat. The second category is known as sensomotor actions. These actions are reacting to fright or reflex actions, pulling one's hand away from a heat source before the pain has registered, for example. The common factor in these unconscious actions is that they are instinctive and involuntary. In 1852, psychologist William B. Carpenter identified a third category of unconscious action, the ideomotor action. Ideomotor actions are unconscious, involuntary motor movements that are performed by a person because of prior expectations, suggestions, or preconceptions. The classic example is that of dowsing. Dowsers usually hold their rods out in front of them so that they are parallel. They come across whatever it is that they are trying to detect, usually water. The rods will cross over at the point. A complete novice who is told that water is beneath the ground at a certain point will find that they crossed the point. Their dowsing rods will deflect or cross. This is because they know where the point is, and they subconsciously move their hands slightly, which crosses the rods. The important thing to stress is that this is done unconsciously. The person who is crossing the rods do not realize that they are themselves doing it. In fact, it feels as if some external force is acting upon the rods, which makes the experience even more powerful. This can be shown to be Ideomotor action by doing several actions here, by performing several tests, so to speak. Number one, blinding the test subject to where the water is. They perform no better than chance at dousing water if they don't know where it is beforehand. Then there's two, suggesting to the test subject that the water lies in a certain place, perhaps with a false demonstration. It is found that if they believe water to be present, the dowsing rods will cross whether water is there or not. Now, this shows that it is the preconception that causes the effect, and not the presence of water. The same effect is achieved by asking a pendulum to swing north or south to answer yes, and east or west to answer no to a question. It is the subconscious moving of the person's hand that dictates which way the pendulum will swing. Simple. That just kind of throws out the idea that it's something spiritual or something invisible to the eye. It really, and I'm not saying that it does. I definitely believe in the spiritual world. I have no doubts of that, and I'm pretty sure that many of you have no doubts of that either. But there is a case to be made for the Ideomotor effect. There really is, because if we can understand that it is our subconscious that's acting, then we can respond differently to what's happening around us. So, like, in my bathroom, there is a wooden medicine cabinet. And once while I was in the bathroom, I was, using the bathroom, I was urinating. And it felt as if someone on the other side of the wall hit the other side of the wall. And I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Is somebody inside my house? So naturally, when I was finished, I stepped out the bathroom and I turned the lights on around the hall to see what was going on around there. At the end of the day, there wasn't anybody inside my house. There was no intruder. I didn't have to go and get my pistol and clear my house. I've done that before, because I heard a bump somewhere in the house, and I'm like, I know I'm the only person here. So, it turns out that whenever I urinate, and whenever my roommates urinate, I don't know which one, we would kind of press our hand against the wooden medicine cabinet to brace ourselves. And in doing so, we're pushing the wall in, because inside the wall is some sheet metal for ventilation for the house. And when you're done and you walk away and the next person comes in to urinate, that wall kind of kicks back, because it's the sheet metal inside the wall is readjusting to the pressure, and it pops back out. Making the person in the bathroom think, oh, there's somebody inside my house. And so he goes and gets his pistol and he's clearing the house, making sure there aren't any murderers in there. I'm laughing because I did that. I was the only one home. Oh my goodness. But this is the Ideomotor effect. And after I realized what was going on with the wall, the next time I heard it, I knew that it was just the sheet metal inside the wall readjusting to the pressure and to the temperature. Now, let's cover the scope of the Ideomotor effect. The Ideomotor effect was first recognized as early as the beginning of the 19th century, although Carpenter did not name it as such until 1852. It came to be recognized when scientists looked into the 19th century fascinations, such as dowsing, pendulums, non-fraudulent of course, table tipping in seances, automatic writing, Ouija boards, etc., it being a non-paranormal explanation for the results of these practices. Of course, he said non-fraudulent because these things happened. If you remember, the Fox sisters went around and told their neighbor that they could speak to ghosts, and they would ask it questions and ask it to knock so many times, and it would knock so many times, and this blew her mind. And so she told other people, and before you know it, these sisters were performing this trick for audiences. And then a point came when they moved with their older sister in New York. They began to do shows. These are sold out shows. People would sit there and they would listen to these girls perform. And oh my goodness, it's amazing. These sisters are amazing. Because they're proving that these spiritual things are happening. But here's the kicker of it all. One of the sisters told the truth. She sat there and she explained to everybody, look, this isn't what's really happening. There's really nothing to this. This is what's happening. And she explained what they were doing. But people, being people, were so set in their belief of these spiritual activities that they went ahead and believed it anyway. It's almost like they wanted to be deceived, you know? But the Ideomotor effect, in more modern times, the Ideomotor effect has shown itself to be prevalent in medical quackery, especially in the diagnosis of ailments. Medical quackery, not my words, those are his words. He calls it medical quackery. So thank you, Mr. Jackson, for that bit of humor, but he may have offended us chiropractor somewhere. But in more modern terms, the Ideomotor effect has shown itself to be prevalent in medical quackery, especially in the diagnosis of ailments. Radionic devices, chiropractors, rubbing plates, applied kinesiology, and radiesthesia, medical dowsing, often with crystals, are examples of where the Ideomotor effect is what is actually going on rather than the real medical diagnosis. Another disturbing area where the Ideomotor effect shows up is in the pseudoscientific practice of facilitated communication. This is where people who are otherwise unable to communicate due to, say, autism or cerebral palsy have their hand held over a keyboard by a person known as a facilitator. When asked questions, the disabled person is now able to communicate with help from the facilitator by typing out answers on the keyboard. Of course, that is really going on. What is really going on is that it's the facilitator who's giving the answers, albeit unconsciously. Interesting. Now, here's a summary of it all. The Ideomotor effect causes small, unconscious motor movements because of the person's expectations or preconceptions or suggestibility. The person is not aware that they are causing the movements, therefore they ascribe the movement to an external force or power. The movement feels unnatural. The external forces perceived or are usually thought of as being paranormal in nature. The effect is real and therefore can be repeated. This can lead to self-reinforcement of the paranormal explanation of the effect, which can create a belief in some special paranormal ability. Once a belief is formed and reinforced, the believer does not usually ever give it up. Dowsers, healers, etc., who continually fail to pass objective scientific tests do not give up their belief. They tend to make often fantastical excuses for their failures, rather than accept a rational explanation for their ability. Now, here is Jackson's conclusion of the matter. The Ideomotor effect has been known for over 150 years, yet it is as an explanation for dowsing. Yet it is still not a widely known phenomenon. It tends to be used rightly as an explanation for dowsing and the Ouija board. Its scope, however, is much wider than that, and it should be more widely known explanation for delusions, especially those of medical quacks. The Ideomotor effect is a classic example of how we can be fooled by our senses and ourselves. Many people believe in these things because they have experienced them for themselves. They trust in the perceived infallibility of their senses. The Ideomotor effect is just one example of why we should use objective scientific testing rather than rely on subjective personal experience to work out what is real and what is not. And the source for this was the Association of Critical Thinking, circa 2013. The content is free to be copied, displayed, or distributed for non-commercial purposes, provided it remains unchanged, and the author and the Association for Critical Thinking is credited as the source. And you can go to this website, www.critical-thinking.org.uk. Now, when I first read this paper, I thought Jackson was unreasonable in his explanation of the Ideomotor effect. I believe that he was somewhat unfair in calling people like chiropractors quack science or quack medical quack medicine, because we do know that there are people who need chiropractors, and chiropractors are very good at their craft at getting people feeling back the way they should be feeling and readjusting their bodies in the way that they do. But in terms of Ouija boards and in terms of dowsing, but this topic is about Ouija boards. In terms of Ouija boards, I think it's necessary to have Mr. Jackson's perspective, because it causes us to understand that it is us that is making these unconscious movements. Who's moving the planchette? Are you moving it? I'm not moving it. Are you moving it? I'm not moving it. All of your hands are on it. You're all moving it. But that still doesn't negate the fact that we can be contacted by spirits, be they good or bad. And this has clearly been proven. It's not a science thing necessarily. People can be possessed by demonic entities. People can be possessed by familiar spirits. As we know from the Bible, Paul the Apostle him and Silas went to a city to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ and to reach people for Jesus Christ, for the salvation of their souls, to teach them that they can be forgiven of their sins and that they don't have to live in the way that they have been living. And while he was there, they were followed by a woman who had a familiar spirit. And this familiar spirit in this woman was prompting her to follow Paul and Silas and say, hey, these are the men of God, and they've come to teach us the way of life and to better our lives, etc., everything she was saying. And Paul was annoyed by her. He was very annoyed by her, to the point that one day he stopped and he turned around and he rebuked that spirit that was in her. Not only did he rebuke it, he cast it out of her. He, through the power of Jesus Christ, removed that spirit, that unclean spirit, familiar spirit from that woman. Now here's the kicker. This woman's masters used her to make money. They use her, this woman being affected by this familiar spirit, a spirit of untold centuries existence, knows things that we don't. So this spirit potentially could have heard, let's say you go to the classic woman with the crystal ball to tell your fortune, and let's say she's actually possessed of a familiar spirit, and you go to her and you want advice from her, or you want to know, should I marry my girlfriend? And she tells you your girlfriend is sleeping with your brother. She may not know that, but that familiar spirit inside of her would know that and could give her that information and could give her specific details. And so, of course, she tells you. And so now you're now deceived that this woman is some great prophetess. No, she's just a woman with a familiar spirit. And the day that she wants to be free from that spirit, she's going to find out that that spirit isn't going to let her go. Demonic entities inside of people is not a pleasant thing. And Jesus discovered this. The disciples, well, Jesus knew this. The disciples are the ones who did the discovery. We're the ones that get to discover when we read the account in the Bible. This man came to the disciples to have his son, have the spirit removed from his son. And when he finally got to talk to Jesus, he was like, oftentimes the spirit would throw him into the water to try to drown him, or it'll throw him into the fire. The spirit inside of him, that wicked spirit inside of him, was forcing this kid to throw himself into the water, trying to drown him. This wicked spirit got some kind of kinky enjoyment out of torturing this kid. And Jesus had to cast that thing out of that kid so that he could be returned to his father and he could live a normal life. Look at the man with the legion. He had a legion in him. Do you know how much a legion is? Go Google, define legion, and find out how many is in a legion. This guy had a legion of demonic entities inside of him. And he came to Jesus. And realistically, whether the man came to Jesus or whether those entities forced him to come to Jesus, I don't know. But when Jesus got there, it wasn't the man that spoke to him. It was the spirits inside the man. Asking, why has he come there? Has he come to torture them before the time? Why would they say that? Because they know that there is an appointed time when they're going to be tortured. There's an appointed time when they're going to be incarcerated, and their free reign of the world is going to be over. They won't be able to terrorize mankind anymore. They knew that. And they correctly knew that Jesus was going to cast them out of that man. And they asked him that they begged his permission to at least go into the swine that was that was across the way. And Jesus gave them permission to go. Look at that. They needed Jesus' permission to not only leave the man, but to go and to take over the swine. And look what the swine did. The swine ran violently down a steep hill and threw themselves into the water. Even they couldn't bear having those demonic entities in them. They threw themselves into the water and drowned. Those swine would rather die than to be possessed by a demonic entity. Meanwhile, this man was free. Now, what he did to become possessed with a legion of entities like that, I don't know. Don't know what he did. I just want to make sure that I don't do it. And I'm definitely not going to play with a Ouija board because I don't want either my subconscious to disrupt my livelihood or some evil entity affecting me through the board. I'm just not going to do that. I'm not going to put myself in that position. Years ago, I've gone to nightclubs, but I wouldn't do that now because I don't like the crowd that comes along. I don't like being around the alcohol and the smoking and the atmosphere, and I just don't like that atmosphere. And plus, I'm a Christian now, so I'm not going back there anyway. But I stay away from those things because I don't like or want the type of company that comes with that. And it's the same way with Ouija boards. I don't play with Ouija boards because I don't want what comes with that. So I guess I've been doing more trying to convince you guys not to play with Ouija boards. But if you're going to play with them anyway, please be careful. At least learn about the Ideomotor effect. At least do your research. And that doesn't mean Google something here and there. That means really, really learn and make sure you know what you're doing before you get involved. Because to not do so could be a problem. Now, in this next segment, I was going to read some Ouija board stories, and I have a few short ones. I don't want to read them all, but I'm going to read this one, and then I'm going to let you decide, because people have experiences that the Ideomotor effect either does or does not explain due to a lack of research, that it doesn't account for it. So in this next segment, I'm gonna read one of those accounts of an experience someone had because they touched something that they shouldn't have. One time I was playing with my Ouija board with my friend. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. This story was written by, oh my goodness, dare I say it, by Reddit user Dad's Nut Milk 1. Dad's Nut Milk 1. Why did I say that twice? But it's his encounter with a particular entity who shall remain nameless. One time, I was playing with my Ouija board with my friend. I'll call her Rachel for the sake of her privacy. Rachel and I were in my basement, and she wanted me to show her how to use a Ouija board. We were asking basic questions like, how old are you and what is your name? And the board was answering without any problems. Eventually, the board spelled out the name that shall not be spoken. And we hadn't even asked it a question. It just did it. So we were now supposedly talking to that entity which shall not be mentioned, the infamous Ouija Board demon. I explained to Rachel who the infamous Ouija Board demon was, and we continued talking to it. And I was kind of an idiot and decided I would attempt to aggravate it by basically telling him he was not powerful and he didn't scare me. He claimed he couldn't sell scary stuff because he had a broken leg. So I accused him of lying. After about half an hour of me being really stupid, Rachel asked the board, "What do you want from us?" This is when it got creepy. It immediately spelled out D-I-E, and simultaneously my nose started to bleed. We ran upstairs to tell my mother what had happened, and she said it was probably a coincidence. To this day, that board doesn't work, and when I try to use it, it only moves in a figure eight around the letters. I had to purchase a new board, and I've learned my lesson about egging on the demons. Did he learn his lesson? It sounded like he didn't even properly close the board out. He should have said goodbye and moved it to the goodbye. But, better yet, he should not have ever played with the thing. It seems I have some time, so I'll read one more. And this story is by Sydzot, S01e02, and it's called Still Can't Believe It Worked a Little Too Much. I believe in spirits and all that stuff, but never would I believe a Ouija board would actually work. To think I bought this thing from my local Toys R Us. To think that I bought this thing from our local Toys R Us is wild because of how dangerous this was. This happened in 2017, and to this day still sounds like a made-up story. But this was believably real. My boyfriend, my best friend, and I decided it would be a great to try out in my car in a cemetery at 11 p.m. Yeah, already started out not to be a good idea. At first it was all well and fine. We connected with the spirit named Cody, who died in the 1920s by drowning in a nearby lake. No problem. Until we lost Cody and something else came through. It claimed to be a fallen angel, and we would ask it generic questions, especially on how he fell from heaven and all that. Nothing too relevant. After that second encounter, we encountered something mortifying. After a brief pause from the fallen angel, it seems that somebody else came through, and they were not nice. We started asking questions about our lives that nobody else knew but ourselves. All answers were correct, but that's reasonable as to the spirits manipulate and read your minds. I asked about my death, and it told me I'd die in a car crash. When it got to the point where it was starting to freak us out with horrid answers, I Googled how to safely end the conversation and found an answer. Wrote, "We will have to say goodbye and bring the planchette to goodbye," in my notes app so I wouldn't have to say it out loud. As soon as I showed them, the board said, "I saw that." Immediately after, we were super spooked, so we tried bringing the planchette to goodbye. It was all downhill from that point. The spirit literally stopped the planchette in its tracks on the way to goodbye. It refused to let us leave. It had to have been almost 1 a.m. at this point, and we were freaked out, especially with the overwhelming strength of this thing. All three of us tried our best to move the planchette to goodbye, but this thing would not move. I know this sounds super fake, and trust me, if I was reading this, I wouldn't believe me either. But this is the most real thing I've ever felt, seen, and done. I frantically called my parents while we were all stuck on the board. We were too terrified to take our hands off, but it got to the point where we were so sore we had to let go. This thing was moving without us using it. It was freaking out. Going to the four corners of the board, I have seen the movies and heard the stories of dangerously ending the game and releasing the spirits, so I was terrified to end it there on that note. My best friend decided to try and hold the planchette so it would stop moving. I called my parents. My mom is very religious, so she started to pray on the phone. The spirit was not happy. While my mom started praying, the planchette was shaking and turning 360 degrees, repeating. While my friend's hand was on it, this thing literally almost broke her hand. I am not kidding. So that didn't work. We were all freaked out and regretting we ever did this. In a cemetery, no less. My parents ended up having to drive 30 minutes to us at 2 a.m. And when they got there, my mom brought her rosaries and started to pray. The board was shaking and we were trying to hold the planchette down. And it hurt so bad from the strength of this thing. At this point, my father had enough and took the board and snapped it in half. Yes, he shouldn't have, but he didn't know any other solution. My parents ended up driving my car home because I was terrified of the car crash. There was so much creepy stuff to the story, but after telling it so many times in the past 3 years, I have forgotten most of the details. I know this sounds super fake, but this really opened my eyes to what is beyond this world. And if there are such things as demons, then there has to be angels. It really helped me further my belief and to get into my faith from this logic. I tell my boyfriend and friend every day that if we all filmed this, we would have made bank off of the video because of how real and crazy it was. I'm still terrified to this day that it will come back and haunt me, but I've been safe since prayers. This stuff is real and is not to be messed with. Interesting. So it looks like I have one more story. Well, I'll just go ahead and give it to you anyway. The Ouija Board Demon by Leah_Tens. It started back in July, and my best friend and some other people and I used a Ouija board. It started out as a spirit who claimed there was a little girl by the age of 3. The first thing it spelled out was mum. We kept asking questions, but I felt uneasy the whole time. Its age kept changing, and eventually it told us it was lying. We asked if it was a good or a bad spirit, and obviously it was a bad one. It said it wanted to harm my best friend, and later just kept going into the letters A and H, like it was laughing at us. Immediately, what happened, I told my friend to say goodbye, and when she did, I felt a kissing sensation on my forehead. It was like something pressing on my head, and I remember a tear falling down my cheek. I don't cry. It wasn't out of sadness or fear. According to my friends and what I remember, I acted extremely aggressive and vouched to burn the board. I remember my friend's mom telling us not to burn the board, and I literally cried out of anger. Both me and my friend knew There was something attached to me from the beginning because she had looked up the symptoms and I had all of them. It felt like it was always standing behind me with its clawish hands on my shoulders. It followed me home where it would frequently just talk to me, especially in the shower where I figured out that it was a he. He would always make comments about my body, calling me sexy or good looking. He would always try and manipulate me, but I knew better. And eventually he just went away. He did not tell me that I was an empath. He did tell me that I was an empath, that I was very connected to the demon world, and that my best friend was a vessel. He wanted to get me to, and he got me to through my friend. I would frequently see him everywhere I would go, a tall, lanky, shadowy presence with long arms and a jagged head. But I just stopped out of nowhere, and that was the end of it. Fast forward to literally a few days ago. My friend's mom hid the board from us after everything happened the first time. Now it is December, and I think she figured we could handle ourselves. The first thing we tried to use it was a large group of friends. We asked if anyone wanted to talk to us, but the planchette just slid to no every time. My best friend and I just kind of shrugged it off and waited till the next day where we could just do it together. Next day come along, and everyone who slept over at my best friend Forever's house that night left besides this girl and me. So 3 of us go down into the basement where we had left the board, sit down and open it up. Immediately the spirit wants to talk to us, but I instantly grew suspicious. I knew it was him. My best friend and I looked at each other, and I could see that she knew too. We said goodbye and decided we needed to find a better, more comfortable place to talk to him. So we go upstairs with the board and set up, and once again, the same spirit is there talking to us. I was only asking a few questions, and it was just mostly my best friend talking. He said he was a 45-year-old man that lived in the house. The 2 girls fell for it, yet I did not. I stayed silent until I saw the planchette go to the letters A-H back and forth. He was laughing. I remember exclaiming, "I knew it," and asked the spirit if he was who I thought he was. He slid the planchette to yes. I started talking to him as if he was a friend, and my friends grew a little more comfortable, and they picked up on it too. He would frequently trick the other girls and confuse them, my best friend being the most gullible. I kept asking him if he was telling the truth, and of course he slid the piece over to no. It seemed like I was the only one who could see past his lies. I remember calling him a trickster, and he said yes. He was very into our convos, and even knew about an ex-boyfriend of my best friend, and even spelt out his name. The spirit told us he lived in our house, so maybe he eavesdropped, but who knows. Anyways, I finally got the balls to ask the spirit if he attached himself to me, and he answered yes. I kept asking if he was telling me the truth after many questions, and he would be honest. We asked if he had a favorite, and he did, so we asked him to point to them. I remember the planchette turning clockwise towards me and stopping. I asked if I was his favorite, and he said yes. Honestly, I felt honored, because demons really interested me, and I felt a strong connection to this one because he had been attached to me for so long. Finally, we asked what we should call him, since he would never tell us his name. So we asked him to spell out a nickname. He spelled out a nickname that I'm not going to mention right now. We kind of laughed and asked if he was sure, and of course he was. I was like, "What? because that's when I knew something was up. I got home, did my research, and came to a conclusion. It's the Ouija Board demon. I'm not saying his real name. As of right now, this is all that has happened. I plan on talking to him again. If anyone knows anything that will help me, it would be greatly appreciated. Don't worry, by the way. I stay very unbiased in these situations, and I am not quick to trust. I do not trust this demon. I just want to know more and why he is so attached to me. Also, I want to eventually get rid of him because he's preventing other spirits from talking to us. Thank you all so much. So, those are 3 stories of people who encountered a spiritual entity, and it showed itself to be quite aggressive with them. I'm not clear on how the Ideomotor effect is involved with an actual entity, but I'm going to stick to my foregone conclusions as I've been discussing this thing about the Ouija board and demonic entities and whatnot. And that conclusion is, don't play with Ouija boards. Just leave them alone. Don't touch them. Stay away. If you're smart, you will stay away. It's just best just to stay away. Well, that's the end of our broadcast. Thank you for listening, and we hope that the next broadcast isn't so far away, but work is so possessive of me. But that's what happens when you allow your hubris to force you into a supervisor role. But anyways, thank you for listening. I appreciate your patronage, and I hope to hear from you soon. This has been Smiling Observer with the Paranormal Observer Podcast.